Wonderful. Brilliant. So today we're going to cover a few things, guys, but before we get on to that, the QR code for our student union sign up is there as well. We strongly encourage everyone to sign up, get more great content, keep us in the student union so we can keep delivering this sort of stuff. We'll go over the basics of plant-based diets as well as the history behind it. We'll go to nutritional benefits behind these plant-based diets and vegetarian diets, myths and misconceptions that are out there about these restricted ways that we can eat, how to do it right, how to be on a plant-based diet and still get all the nutrition that we need. We'll also be talking about sustainable eating and the future, particularly how we can feed our growing population, how we can feed those that are already malnourished, and that's talking about cultivated meats. We'll have time for a bit of Q&A. You can hit me with whatever questions you'd like. So, basically, we'll go into the introduction. You're going to hear me say the word diet quite a bit here. I know normally when we hear the word diet, we think of restricting to lose weight. In the world of nutrition and dietetics, we use the word diet to talk about just generally how we eat. So, this plant-based diet, in general, is a diet that is avoiding animal products. So, it's mainly fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, meat substitutes, and soy products. There are some general principles that you might see out there about a plant-based diet. This includes things like also avoiding processed foods, mainly focusing on whole foods and avoiding things like refined sugars or refined products. We'll be going into this in a little bit because this, in my opinion, is quite a restrictive way of eating. You can still have a plant-based diet whilst also enjoying a wide variety of foods, and that's also really important to make sure we're getting all the nutrition that our body needs. Right, briefly on the different types of reduced animal diets. So we won't go into too much detail about it. For the purpose of today's talk, I'll be using the term plant-based and vegan slightly interchangeably. When we talk about that, again, it's avoiding all animal products. When we talk about vegetarianism, this is again avoiding mainly animal meats, and there's a few subgroups to it you'll see up there. We use the word lacto when someone still includes dairy, ovo when they still include eggs. So we've got lacto-ovo, ovo, or lacto-vegetarian. We've also got semi-vegetarians or flexitarians, you might hear them called as well, but mainly vegetarian, but still sometimes including animal products, and pescatarian. So mainly vegetarian, but also including seafood, as well as possibly eggs and dairy. The other thing to keep in mind is that part of any fun and good diet is that we also have treat food. So there's lots of plant-based foods out there. Food is not just a sustainer, it's also about enjoyment. So it's a key concept we're going to keep coming back to. A little bit about the history. Plant-based and reduced animal intake diets have been around for an extremely long time. Dates back to ancient Greece, so Pythagoras, the philosopher best known for his triangle and theorem, also was an advocate for a plant-based diet. It's mainly from like a morality perspective, and up until about the 1800s, it was actually known as the Pythagorean diet if you're on a plant-based diet. Lots of religions have plant-based or vegetarian diets, again, mainly for morality. And in the mid-1800s, when the Seventh-day Adventist Church was formed, they were also promoting a vegetarian diet, mainly for health and longevity. Side fun note, you might have heard of blue zones across the world. So these are areas where there are high populations of people that can live over 100 years. They're in the Mediterranean, there's some in Japan. The only one in America is a town that's made up entirely of Seventh-day Adventists. So, in the 1980s is when the term plant-based was first coined, and that's kind of where we've gone from there. If we look to where we are now, we can see that plant-based diets are increasing dramatically, as well as the sale of plant-based products. Whether this is to do with the fact that we're more aware of the health benefits of it, the animal welfare aspect of it, whether it's also celebrity endorsement, it's becoming more popular. So, quick facts. Thank you, William, for also going over these, and I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of these. We know that livestock and animal products contribute so much to our environmental impact. It's estimated that animal livestock contributes to 1/4 of our water footprint across the world, of all of humanity. We also know that it leads to an increase in loss of biodiversity and increased deforestation. It's estimated that 91% of deforestation in the Amazon is related to livestock production. The other thing to think about is food insecurity. That's essentially world hunger. It's estimated that if we could redirect the crops that are used to feed animals that we then eat, to feeding humans, it would feed an additional 4 billion people across the world. Nutritional benefits. So again, I'm sure a lot of you are already keen on this and already know some of these, but in general, there are lots of nutritional benefits to a plant-based diet. What we know is that as we cut down on animal products, we're avoiding more of what we call saturated fats. These are the unhealthy fats, ones that can lead to heart disease, cardiovascular disease, that sort of thing. We're eating more of these healthy, unsaturated fats. We're also getting more fiber. There's more fiber in fruits, vegetables, legumes, all those sorts of things. And they're rich in antioxidants, which all are very anti-inflammatory for our body. All of this together has a massive impact on our health. Being on a plant-based or vegetarian diet is shown to improve so many things. It reduces our risk of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, multiple cancers, and in general, how long we live for. There are lots of pros to it. We've got some advantages and disadvantages here. We've just covered a few of the pros of it. Another thing to think about is our gut microbiota. Now, this is something that's gained a lot of popularity in the last few years. Essentially, a very brief summary of it is about the bacteria that's in our gut. We have lots of good and bad bacteria, helps with lots of things throughout our body. What we do know is that the more diversity, the more hundreds of thousands of different types of bacteria that we have in our gut, the better our health is, both our physical health and our mental health. And what's shown is vegetarian and plant-based diet adherents have better diversity in their gut microbiota. So that's really a big positive. But are there disadvantages? Yes. So it can be harder to get the essential nutrients that we need. This is both the what we call macronutrients, so things full of calories, protein, fat, carbohydrates, those sorts of things. Also harder to get the vitamins and minerals. This can lead to some health consequences, so deficiencies can lead to osteoporosis. Another thing to consider is that being on a plant-based diet can also sometimes be adopted for the purposes of losing weight. So as dietitians, we do want to make sure that when someone chooses a plant-based diet, that they are being healthy for themselves, and that's something that we need to check in with as well. The other thing to consider is, depending on our health status, if we are unwell, if we are pregnant, if we are young, if we are old, if we are a performance athlete, being on a plant-based diet might make it even harder to get all those essential nutrients that we need. So there sounds like a lot of cons, but we can do this right. And we're going to cover the steps that we can take to make sure that we do this right to keep ourselves well, whilst also adhering to a plant-based diet. Before we get into that though, we're going to cover some common myths and misconceptions about plant-based diets. Number one, in general, lacks protein nutrients. You can't get enough protein and nutrients if you're on a plant-based diet. I mean, yes, we just covered that. That's definitely something that can happen. But if you plan your meals, if you think about what you're doing, you can absolutely get the nutrients you need. And we'll cover that in detail to make sure everyone feels confident with how to follow through with a plant-based diet. Soya is bad for you. So this is a common one that you might have heard. Some people say that phytoestrogen, so this is a natural component that's in soy and essentially looks very similar to estrogen, which is a hormone in our body, is that can be really unhealthy if we have it, particularly for people with breast cancer. Some people say avoid soy because that could alter your hormones. It has been researched a lot, particularly looking at countries where they eat a lot of soy products, and it's been shown that there is no negative consequences for it, even for someone who's had breast cancer or in recovery. In fact, these phytoestrogens have a beneficial anti-inflammatory property to it. It can reduce our risk of obesity, reduce our risk of cancer, even if we eat up to 50 grams of soy protein a day. That's not the amount of soy, that's the protein within it. So I've got some examples of the amount of protein within different soy products there. So you could see you could eat 50 grams of protein every day, day in, day out, and it would only be good for you. There is no negative consequence to these phytoestrogens. Humans are herbivores. So should we naturally not be eating animal products? I wish I had a better answer for this. The jury is still out. So there's lots of research back and forth. There's some research that says if we look at our teeth, some of it's designed for chewing plant-based foods, some of it's designed for chewing animal foods. In terms of the nutrients, we'll cover this in a moment, but the nutrients in animal products, we actually absorb better than plant-based products. So there's arguments to both sides. There is no definitive answer. Sorry. Next one. Some plant-based products are ultra-processed food, or UPFs. So I'm going to give a little bit of detail about this to properly understand what a processed food is and why it's not necessarily a fair categorization when we think about food. So when we look at processed foods, the main ways that we categorize it is with this system up here. It's called the NOVA system. It's from Brazil. NOVA doesn't stand for anything, annoyingly. But essentially it breaks foods into 4 different categories. So food group number 1 is unprocessed foods. This is foods in their most natural state. So it is fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh meat, those fresh legumes. So it's the most natural state it can be in. There's also a subgroup to this, which is minimally processed foods. So it's these natural foods that have had just a teensy bit of modification to them. So they might have been dried or fermented or pressed just a little bit, or pasteurized like milk. The next group, processed culinary ingredients. This is basically foods from group 1, the natural foods, that have been processed a bit more, but they're usually only used in the cooking process. So it would be things like oils, butter, salt, sugar, honey, those sorts of things. Group 3, we're already at processed foods. So processed foods are essentially, they're defined as group 1 and group 2 combined together. So anything that you make from home, from scratch, is a processed food. Anything you buy in a restaurant that's made from fresh ingredients is a processed food. It's also just plain things like salted peanuts. That is salt and peanuts put together in a package. That's a processed food. Group 4 is now the ultra processed foods. So this essentially groups literally everything else in there. So it essentially is group 1, group 2, or group 3 all added together. And typically the definition also then says additives added to it for preserving or for taste, those sorts of things. So yes, ultra processed foods does include things that we classically think of as being really processed. So it's like crisps, it's chocolate, those sorts of things. But it's also so many other foods, because this system purely is looking at the processing of it. It's not looking at the nutrition of the foods, it's only how we've gotten to that processing point. A lot of words I've just said, so it's a nice little summary there. The reason I want to give that detail is because when we look at foods purely just based on one aspect of it, the processing of it, we are ignoring so many other things going on. We're not looking at the individual nutrients in it, how those nutrients interact, how our body absorbs it. It's a concept called nutritional reductionism, and it isn't a really good way to look at our food. It really unfairly categorizes foods that are ultra processed. People think of it as being synonymous with not nutritious, which is not correct. An example being delicious peanut butter, natural peanut butter that you'll buy from the shops. It's got peanuts, it's got maybe a little bit of salt added to it. It has then been ground and it's been packaged. So it's an ultra processed food. Same with oat milk or any of our dairy alternatives. Those are ultra processed foods. Even things like organic tofu is a processed food, or even an ultra processed food. So the more important thing that we do is that we should be looking at the dietary pattern of someone. What is someone eating over a day, over a week? Is it balanced? Has it got good nutrients in it? It's shown that 60% of our diet in the UK is ultra processed foods. That does not necessarily mean it's bad. So yes, some plant-based foods definitely are processed or ultra processed, but that does not mean that they are not nutritious. Okie dokie. So now let's talk about how to do this right, how to do a plant-based diet right to get all the nutrients that we need. I've summarized kind of the main differences up here, but we're going to go into each of the main important nutrients that we might be missing out on, because there's lots of things that we naturally will get when we have a plant-based diet. We're going to be getting a lot of fiber, a lot of antioxidants, those sorts of things. We're going to focus on the main ones that we might be missing out on. First one we're going to talk about is protein. So protein is essential for so many things in our body. It is not just for bulking or shredding or maintaining all that muscle. It has lots of different metabolic functions throughout our entire body. There are 25 amino acids that we need in our body. A large majority of those our body can actually produce within our cells, but there are 9 that our body cannot make. So they are essential. They are essential that we get from our diet. Animal sources of protein have all 9 essential amino acids in them. Unfortunately, plant-based foods do not have all 9 in them. They usually have maybe 4 or maybe 5 in them. The one exception to that is soy. Soy actually has all 9 amino acids in it. So again, plugging soy, it's amazing. So if we don't want to eat soy all the time, what are our options to make sure that we're still getting all the amino acids, all the nutrients that our body needs to stay well? There is a concept called complementing our proteins or complementary protein. Essentially what this is taking 2 different plant-based sources of protein, one containing 4 of the amino acids, one containing 5 of them, eating them in the same meal, and then you're getting all the amino acids you need. Basically, you should try and eat them at the same meal or kind of within an hour of each other. The 2 groups we may look at are, group number 1 is grains, so wheat, rice, barley, all those sorts of things, quinoa, and corn. Group 2 is legumes, nuts, and seeds. So if you combine one food from each of those groups together, you're going to get all the amino acids you need. Super simple to do that, just takes a little bit of thought into it. So it can be as simple as peanut butter on toast or baked beans on toast. It is curries using lentils or chickpeas with rice or naan. It is a lentil bolognese with pasta. There are so many options. It just takes that extra step to think to make sure, am I getting all those amino acids together? Next one, we'll talk about vitamins. You're going to hear me say vitamins, sorry, British people, and minerals. So when we talk about vitamins and minerals, there's a key concept that we need to think about with plant-based diets, and that is bioavailability. We can look at how much of a vitamin is in a food, but we need to know how much of that our body can actually absorb. And what we do know, that's called bioavailability, how much we can absorb. And what we do know is that plant-based sources of vitamins and minerals, unfortunately, generally have a lower bioavailability. So that does make it difficult to get all those vitamins and minerals that we need. First, I'm going to talk about iron. So iron is essential for so many things. It makes hemoglobin in our blood. That's responsible for taking oxygen all around our body. So very important. 2 types of iron that we can get from our food. Heme iron, which comes mainly from animal sources, and non-heme iron. This is from plant-based sources. As we can see up there on board, so non-heme iron, the plant-based sources, it's a much lower bioavailability in it. So how do we work around this? Number 1, it's just thinking about adding extra plant-based iron sources to our meals. So adding extra spinach, extra tofu, all those sorts of things to make sure that we're getting extra. It's also about, another thing you can think about is vitamin C. So if we eat foods with vitamin C at the same time that we eat foods with iron, it actually boosts that bioavailability, makes it, we absorb more of it. So if you eat those 2 things at the same time, let's say you have some spinach and you have a glass of orange juice with it, or you add some tomatoes or some peppers to your meal. Generally foods that are yellow, orange, or red have vitamin C in it. It's just kind of like what brings out the color in it. So that's a really easy way to boost the absorption of iron. Taking supplements, taking nutritional supplements. So I'm a big advocate for it because we are at risk of deficiencies if we're on a plant-based diet. So iron supplements, also getting one with vitamin C to get that boost. It'll say it on the label, is really important. And getting regular blood tests from your GP. So particularly if you're feeling symptomatic, if you're feeling fatigued, low on energy, I'm sure as students, we all have energy all the time, but if you're particularly low, consider getting a blood test and maybe you'll be able to start an iron supplement. Next one, calcium. So calcium is essential for healthy bones and teeth. Main source is dairy, but there are several plant-based sources as well. Mainly it's green leafy vegetables that we see. It's also in soy products and in grains. The bioavailability of it varies quite greatly. Dairy is about up to 60%. Some vegetables, so things like broccoli, it's about 50% we absorb. Spinach, about 5%. So not very much from spinach, unfortunately. So again, how do we work around this to make sure that we're getting enough calcium? Because it's really essential to maintain our bone strength. Main strategies, again, choosing those foods that we know we can absorb more from. So choosing broccoli over predominantly spinach, those sorts of things. The other big one is choosing fortified plant-based products. So if you're choosing a dairy alternative, I highly recommend choosing the fortified one. So essentially the not organic one. They will be supplemented with a lot of the vitamins that we'll be talking about, vitamins and minerals. So it is an important thing to think about. That's a really easy way that we can get it. Again, taking a supplement, one with vitamin D is also of benefit. They help together to form strong bones. The other thing is coffee and tea naturally contain something called tannins in it. Tannins, unfortunately, block how we absorb calcium in our body. So if we can try and avoid having coffee or tea within about an hour of having these foods that have calcium, we can help to make sure we're absorbing as much as possible. I know that makes it hard if we use dairy alternatives in our coffee and tea, but just need to consider. Next one, omega-3s. So this is essentially, it's a fatty acid. It is an unsaturated one, so it's a healthy one that helps with our heart health. It is an antioxidant as well throughout our body, so it helps with anti-inflammatory, reducing cancer risk, a bunch of other things, arthritis as well. Main source is oily fish and seafood, but plenty of plant-based options. It's not in all nuts and seeds, so it is important to think about which nuts and seeds you do incorporate, try and get a bit of variety so you are getting some omega-3s in. And that's essentially the main strategy, is just to think about incorporating some variety into your diet with nuts and seeds, as well as, again, an omega-3 supplement. I know a lot of the ones out there that you might see are going to be seafood one, it'll be fish or krill or something like that, but there are definitely plant-based alternatives up there. There are two main types you'll see. Vitamin B12. Now, this vitamin is very special. It's super essential to keeping our nerves healthy, making DNA within our body. And it is a particularly hard one for people on a plant-based diet to get. Pretty much every source is an animal source that we can get vitamin B12 from. The exception being Marmite or Vegemite and raw seaweed. It does reduce when it's dried seaweed, unfortunately. So it does lead to limited options of how we can get our B12. But the good news, our body is amazing at recycling B12. Rather than just taking it in and getting rid of it, if it doesn't use it, it will recycle it for about a year. So it takes quite a while to develop a deficiency. You don't need to panic about it immediately, but it is something still important to think about. The other good thing, again, a lot of plant-based foods are fortified with B12. So that is meat substitutes, dairy alternative, even breads and cereals are fortified with it. So again, plugging, choosing the fortified dairy dairy alternatives, using a vitamin B12 supplement, or even just a general multivitamin, it'll have vitamin B12 in there. And again, getting a blood test. The symptoms of B12 typically, again, are fatigue. I don't know if anyone's had a B12 shot, but you will feel amazing afterwards. You'll notice this boost of energy. Next point, so this is briefly just going to talk about what's going on with our health or exercise as well. So because we are at risk of possibly not getting as much nutrients, we do need to think about these things when our health might be different. So if someone is pregnant and they are on a very strict vegan diet, it's shown that it can lead to poor outcomes for the baby, whether it's reduced fetal growth, there's a few other things, but essentially in these circumstances, it might be about thinking about whether we expand our diet for a short time period because of the situation that we're in at that moment. Same with if we're unwell, whether it is we are in hospital, whether it's we have cancer, whether it's even just having a common flu at home, our body needs more calories and protein, more stodge, basically to fuel our recovery, to help us to get better quicker. And because a vegan and vegetarian diet can actually be lower in calories and protein, it means that we are more likely to lose weight, which delays our recovery. The good news, though, is that research actually shows you don't even necessarily jump to eating animal products, as long as you think about it and make sure that you're getting that adequate protein in. So it's just, again, about planning the meals rather than just completely avoiding animal products. We just need to plan our meals to make sure we're getting all those nutrients that we need. Last one is exercise. So whether you are someone who does exercise very occasionally, like myself, or if you are a professional athlete, basically after you do exercise, eating protein within an hour afterwards is important to help to build that muscle. At least about 20 grams of protein is what the research shows. In terms of whether or not people on a plant-based diet need to expand and start to eat animal products, doesn't really show that at the moment. So the research that looks at vegetarians versus people who eat animal products shows that they actually have the same endurance athlete outcomes. So VO2 max, a few other things, so they actually can do just as well. Whether research is limited though, is that it doesn't really look at vegans versus vegetarians versus people who eat animal products. The study coming out or currently in progress called the NERMI study, which is looking at just that. So hopefully we'll have some more information on that. But again, the big thing I'll keep coming back to is it just takes a little bit of planning and it can be done right. In summary, so everything in moderation is the phrase you'll hear dietitians say a lot. So basically, food is not just a sustainer, it is for enjoyment. So still enjoy treats, guys. This doesn't mean we have to restrict ourselves. It also means we don't just cut out animal products and don't think about anything else. We do have to plan our meals to make sure we're getting all the nutrients. A good principle is make sure you've got a lot of colors on your plate. Generally, the colors in fruits and vegetables align with different vitamins and minerals. The more colors, the more different vitamins and minerals you're getting at that time. Choosing adequate protein sources. So I've got an example up there of soya milk drink versus oat milk in terms of the protein in it. So they're not like for like. Soya milk actually has a much higher amount of protein in it. So as a milk substitute, it is quite a good one to go for. Using the fortified foods, taking supplements if you need to, and just considering what your health status is at the moment. Okay, so back to sustainable eating. So these stats are actually from a 2003 study, but what it does show is that 2 billion people worldwide will eat meat or are currently on a meat-based diet, and 4 billion people around the world are currently on a plant-based diet. That isn't necessarily because they're choosing to, it's usually because of shortages of the socioeconomic status of that area. So it is reduced land, reduced energy resources, food shortages, crop shortages, those sorts of things. Additionally, the World Health Organization in 2022 showed that 3 billion people worldwide are currently malnourished. That is the largest amount ever recorded in history. In addition to that, we're already at 8 billion people, and it's predicted we'll hit 10 billion in the next 30 years. And for that, it's predicted we'll need at least 70% more food to feed these people. So how can we help to overcome this? William touched on this. This is where we start to think about what are our other options to be able to provide good quality nutrition that is sustainable, that isn't taking such a hit to our environment, that takes into account animal welfare as well. That's where cultivated meats come in. So cultivated meats, what is it? You might hear us call it also cultured meats or lab-based meats. Essentially what it is animal products or animal meat that has been cultivated from animal cells. Essentially, this process eliminates the need for farming animals for food. What they do is they'll take animal cells and arrange it in a similar way, a similar structure, so that it has the same sensory, the same taste and texture, as well as theoretically the same nutrition as conventional meat. For all intents and purposes, lab-based meat and conventional meat are essentially the same. It's just the way that we go about making it that is different. These products, cultivated meat, was first debuted in 2013 on live TV. It was basically a proof of concept, cost quite a bit of money, but we showed that it could be done. By 2015, there were 4 companies making these lab-based products. And in late 2022, there was over 150 companies across 6 continents. Yeah, 6 continents making these different products, working on the research behind it. So how is it made? So my background is not lab-based. It's an extremely complex process, and we're going to talk about it in a really simplified way that I can understand. There's research into literally every step of this process. We're going to talk about it in quite a generic way. Essentially, what they can do is take a biopsy, a small sample from an animal. They can then break that down to get the stem cells from it. These stem cells can then proliferate and differentiate, so they can grow and change into the muscle and fat that we have in animal products. These stem cells are put into a medium. That medium has lots of vitamins and minerals. It's put into a bioreactor with oxygen that helps it to grow. And essentially these vitamins, these minerals, the oxygen, that's the same nutrients that would be given to the muscle and the fat if it was growing in the animal. It is then, after several weeks, taken out. It is prepared, packaged into that final product. There are lots of companies working on this process and also working on different animal products. So it's things like dairy. Now, what are the pros of cultivated meats? Number one, animal welfare. If we are eliminating the process of using animals for food, that's obviously the benefit that we're seeing here. The other one I wanted to touch on is we should consider this as a harm reduction strategy. Yes, you might be thinking, why can't everyone just go to a plant-based diet? Why can't everyone just cut out meat? That might work for a large group of us, and that should be a motivation for a lot of people. But as we know from a lot of other areas, telling someone not to do something does not work. Whether it is in the field of drugs, whether it's sex education, we know that saying no, cold turkey, abstinence, those sorts of things does not work. So we need to think about harm reduction strategies for people who don't want to give up meat. By giving harm reduction strategies, giving these alternatives to them that mimic that meat sensory and the nutrition for it, we're empowering those people to make a better choice for our environment, for our world. Cultivated meats, compared to the conventional ways that we get meat, it's a much more efficient process. So it uses fewer resources. The pollution that's related to agriculture, to the production of meat, pollution to the water, the eutrophication goes down as well. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions and land use dramatically, it's shown to be able to reduce. Other pros that we see, so because of the way that it's produced, it should have fewer incidences of foodborne illnesses, that things like salmonella that we'd be able to avoid. Other benefits are the things that obviously come about from farming animals. So it's the reduced deforestation, reduced biodiversity loss, reduced antibiotic resistance that's used so much in livestock and farming. And theoretically, it's more nutritious than the current plant-based alternative that we've got out there. And theoretically, we'd be able to get more nutrition than those plant-based alternatives. The reason I bring this up is that for a lot of the plant-based alternatives that we have out there right now, they are not necessarily nutritionally an appropriate substitute. They might have the sensory change of it, that's good for us, that mimics it, but it might not nutritionally be there. What we've got up here is standard cheese and a really common cheese alternative up here. We've got our nutrition information panel. This is on every packaged food that you will buy, basically breaks down all the nutrition that you'll see in it. Just wanted to put this up here so we can kind of see a comparison of normal cheddar cheese versus BioLife cheese alternative. So, yes, the BioLife cheese has less calories and less total fat. When we look at the fat that's in food, we say total fat, and that's broken up of the unsaturated fats, so the healthy fats, and the saturated fats. So there's less calories and there's less total fat, but what we see is, even though there's less total fat, there's still the exact same amount of the saturated, unhealthy fat in there. And there's only a really small amount of the healthy fats in there. There's also virtually no protein, and there's more salt. So this is where having cultivated protein products is a really big thing that could help to overcome these issues that we see. These sorts of differences doesn't apply to every plant-based product out there. There's lots of products that do actually have pretty good nutrition in there. Richmond sausages, don't know if anyone's tried the meat-free ones, they are delicious. But if we look at comparing the normal ones to the meat-free ones, there's less calories, there's less total fat by a really significant amount. Yes, there's also less of the unhealthy fats. There's less of the healthy fats, but that's also because there's less total fat in general. Slightly less protein, but they're not doing too bad for that for a plant-based alternative. and there's less salt. So there are definitely some really great plant-based alternatives out there, but again, it's about planning and thinking these cultivated meats could give us a really great option for the future. Are there any cons to cultivated meats? So the main two things that we see is that we need more research in this. There is more research required to help to refine this process. It is an extremely complex, really interesting process. And one of the main issues at the moment is how much it costs. So it's estimated that a pound of cultivated meat is about 17 to 23 US dollars per pound, whereas compared to conventional meat, that maybe about $5 US per pound. Same thing, the next thing is being brought to scale. So how can we produce these cultivated meats on a large scale to feed a large population? But with all the research that's out there at the moment, these things are being improved. We're already seeing it happen. So we can see that the cost of it is coming down. We're seeing that they're refining the process. So it's a really exciting area. Now, the nutrition of it. So there is more research required in this area. But if we are building cultivated meats using animal cells, it should theoretically have the same nutrition as animal products in it. This is a big priority for a lot of these alternative protein companies. It's not just about getting that taste and texture right, it's about making sure it's nutritionally adequate, because otherwise there's no point to it really. We need to make sure it is an appropriate substitute to feed us and nourish us. It also depends on how it's made, and that's why there's a lot more research going into it. When the cells are put into that media, and there is also a scaffold that they'll kind of put around it to help to structure it to grow into the right shape, into that muscle that we want. Could they use a fiber scaffold so that actually adds some fiber to the meat that we're eating? But meat doesn't traditionally have any fiber in it, so that could be a positive of it. There's vitamins and minerals in the media that they grow it in. Is that absorbed into the meat? Or should we add that at a later stage? We can add in those vitamins and minerals that we need to make sure that it is nutritionally well for us. But it's an area that still needs a bit more research, but theoretically, it should be able to provide really good nutrition for us. So when will it make it to market? So in late 2020 is when the commercial sale of alternative proteins and cultivated meats was available in Singapore. Internationally, it is gaining so much attention. It's working through regulatory bodies. And in June 2023, it was approved for 2 companies to commercially have available cultivated chicken products in the US. So this is a lot of information that I've thrown at you guys in a short time period. Basically, the take-home messages. Having a plant-based diet has so many health benefits to us. It's shown in all the research. But there are some pitfalls. If we don't plan the way that we adhere to this plant-based diet, we can develop deficiencies. We can lose those essential vitamins and minerals. We might lose our muscle mass. That has consequences making us feel unwell. So it's just about planning our meals and considering supplements just to stay on top of those sorts of things. And for these pitfalls that we see in the current plant-based diet, cultivated meats could provide that opportunity to overcome a lot of those issues for our future. What's references? Now we're going to some questions, but just before that, we've again got the QR code for our student union there. We really appreciate if anyone would sign up to help us to stay as an official society. We've also got our Instagram page up there if anyone would like to join, get a post for all the latest content that we're delivering. Yeah, that's all, guys. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I have a question. When I ask a question, can you repeat it into the microphone so people on the Zoom?
Yes.
When I changed my diet to a plant-based diet, I noticed some symptoms, some differences in how I was feeling. How do you go about reading the way your body is feeling into what might be deficient in your diet, or what you might need to change to help adapt to that?
Absolutely. Okay, so for people on Zoom, we had a question about when we first went to a plant-based diet, feeling some symptoms, how do we know what's going on, what we might be deficient in? So without covering too much on what symptoms you might be feeling, a lot of the symptoms can be quite vague, so it does make it hard to know exactly what might be going on. The main symptom that we see with a lot of vitamin deficiency is fatigue. Even if you sleep, full 8 hours, 9 hours every night, it's fatigue, low energy. It's really common with B12 deficiency and with iron deficiency as well. So it is very hard to pinpoint, but if you go to your GP and you tell them you're on a plant-based diet, you're worried you've got these symptoms, play it up a little bit if you need to, and they will run some blood tests for you. They'll check a lot of vitamins and minerals for you. Otherwise, it is quite hard to pinpoint. The other thing to keep in mind is that our body is very temperamental in general. So if we have any big sudden change to our diet, if we suddenly cut out all animal products, or if we suddenly travel and it's all different food, even those sorts of things, changes to medication, stress, any of those sorts of things can cause our body to feel awful. Change our bowels, sorry, dietitians, we talk about a lot, can change a lot of things for us. So there's also an adjustment period sometimes. Deficiencies can take months to develop. So if it's an immediate symptom that you're feeling within a month or two of it, it's likely not a deficiency. It's probably just trying to adapt to what's new, because our body is just not great at dealing with change. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question's about one of the slides you had early on about gut microbiota. So you mentioned that plant-based diets give a more diverse gut microbiota, but I was wondering why you think that is. Like, is it to do with like vegetarians typically forcing themselves to try more diverse foods, or are they more like kind of like food conscious?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question that we had was about the gut microbiota and why is it shown that it's more diverse and essentially better in people who are on a plant-based vegetarian diet. So the reason mainly for it is fiber. So because people on a plant-based diet have much higher intake of fiber, that's from the fruits, the vegetables, from legumes, nuts, seeds, all those sorts of things. Fiber is the thing that feeds the bacteria in our gut. The more fiber we eat and the more diverse amount of fiber that we eat as well from different sources, the more it feeds it, the more it grows, and that's what creates that diversity. Yeah, there's still a lot of research into it, but fiber is the main thing that they're looking at. It's also shown that the way that our body, the bacteria kind of eats meat, it can grow or increase the amount of some bacteria that our body doesn't react well to. So it's also partially that, but it's a lot of fiber and also reducing the meat. That's shown to improve that diversity in our gut. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what would kind of balance be for people eating vegan meats? Like, would it be like 80% whole foods and 20% vegan meat, or like, is there a kind of recommended balance that we should have there?
So the question being is like, what kind of balance should we have in our diet in terms of like how much plant-based alternative, protein alternatives on our plate, those sorts of things. But yeah, so basically the main thing I'd recommend is that for your main meals that you have a protein, a carbohydrates, as well as some fruit or vegetables on there. So I know carbohydrates get a lot of the bad rap. There is nothing wrong with carbohydrates. They're a source of protein, lots of vitamins, minerals, and fiber. So generally what I'd say is a quarter of your plate should be a plant-based protein source. The other quarter should be the carbohydrate, and the rest made up with vegetables is the general like healthy rule that we go for. So it doesn't need to be a huge amount of protein on our plate. I know protein again gets a lot of attention, a lot of focus on it, but it's about having everything in moderation, so having a good chunk of both on our plate.
Sorry, I think what she was asking was more like the processed and the less processed.
Oh, processed and low processed.
Yeah, there's also like balance of like, yeah, like vegan sausages versus like lentils, like got like a whole food rather like processed.
Yeah, so look, there aren't really any okay, so the follow-up to that was like what should the balance be between processed and unprocessed food. There aren't really any guidelines out there in terms of like what is best, particularly because these processed foods, it does quite unfairly categorize a lot of foods as being processed, and that equals not nutritious, which isn't correct. So the main rule, again, it's going to be just everything in moderation. So it's what works best for you. If for you, you really enjoy whole foods and having the legumes, chickpeas, those sorts of things, tofu more consistently in your diet, and that works well for you, absolutely. If you prefer to use the more processed plant-based alternatives, that's also okay as well. There is no real rule out there or no research at the moment that shows that one is necessarily better than the other. Yeah.
I was wondering, I know you said that in a hospital, like a clinical setting, it's not always wise to keep it on a plant-based diet, but if someone wasn't suffering from malnutrition, was there for an unrelated reason, what are the hospital and food options for people on a plant-based diet?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that question was about if someone was unwell and they're in hospital, they're on a plant-based diet, but they're not necessarily malnourished or losing weight. What options are there? So pretty much every hospital across the world will have plant-based foods available, as well as just every diverse type of food for any religious reasons, all those sorts of things we account for. So we will still encourage people to stick to the diet that's most comfortable for them. We'll never really force someone to change how they're eating. And yet the research shows that we don't necessarily need to. If you're able to keep up eating enough, you don't need to stop being on a plant-based diet. There are definitely circumstances, and I've had patients in this situation who are on a plant-based diet, they're losing a lot of weight, there's a lot of other circumstances going on, they're not eating well, and we'll talk to them about the options. We'll say, would you feel comfortable introducing maybe dairy or something else? But again, it's about being really respectful about what that person's choices are. There's also lots of protein supplements out there that are plant-based, that are vegan, so we can also try and use those. So we don't try and change someone's diet. If we can use what they're having and make sure that they're getting enough of those calories and protein, it's really important at that point in time, then we'll stick with that. But yeah, there definitely are circumstances where we'll discuss the options of, would you feel comfortable expanding your diet just for a short time period to help to get you through this? Yeah.
I actually have two questions. One is like, what can you recommend to lazy people? I want to change to have a more sustainable diet, but well, sometimes I just go for a week and in some rural area I don't have access to, I don't know, fancy stores or anything, so it's very difficult to get that. Another time when I'm in London, I love it and I love to have a low carbon diet, low carbon meaning low emission.
Yeah.
So is there any recommendation that you can give?
So, okay, so the question was, what is the best option if you're feeling lazy? Or no, it's a really fair question, because making a big change to your diet, it is really taxing. For whatever reason you might be changing your diet, cutting out something, it is a really big thing to do. What we see in being a dietitian is that this happens a lot. People will choose a really extreme diet, whatever it might be, and they'll go for it for a week and then you cave. Because humans aren't very good at sticking with change. The best way to help to change the way that we are eating, it's really awesome that you're thinking about, you know, how it's impacting the environment and those sorts of things. The best strategy I could recommend is to do it gradually. The slower you make the change, the easier it will be. So whether it is, first step, let's go to vegetarian. So you'll still have eggs, you'll still have cheese, you'll have those things available to you. So you're cutting out a big group, you're cutting out animal products, or even if it's just, let's go 6 nights a week, I'll try and go vegetarian. In a few weeks' time, you try and cut out another group, another group, another group. The slower you do it, the easier it is to stick with. It's when we make these big changes that our body kind of kicks into thinking about the foods constantly, and then we cave, or we're in an environment in a rural town where it might be more difficult to find the foods, you know, being, okay, screw it, I'll go back to eating those foods. So it's absolutely a fair question. The best strategy is do it slowly, be kind to yourself. It's awesome that you want to make those changes. Take it slowly and it will be easier.
I have one other question which is unrelated. How can I get a B12 shot? Just like
So that question was, how can I get a vitamin B12 shot? So it does need to be prescribed by a doctor. So generally it is only if you are deficient. if you, probably shouldn't be on recording, if you go to your GP and you tell them how bad your fatigue is, how awful you feel, play up those symptoms, they will do a blood test. If it comes back, you know, okay-ish, play up the symptoms and you're most likely going to be B12 shot.
You could get quite high B12 supplements in Honda on the high street if you want to try taking them, but there's a limit to how much you actually absorb because it's water soluble. So any excess will probably be peed out before you know, like, not the equivalent of having 99 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh, sorry, just to add to your first point as well, actually, that's probably more of a place then of the processed meat alternatives, so that like when you're craving that burger, you can still have a burger, but not feel like you've broken your, like being forgiving with yourself, building a network around you, finding really positive influences, and unfortunately you do have to learn to cook. Sorry.
You're right.
My question is about additives in food. So especially with ultra processed foods, I think a lot of people's concern is so much the nutrition, but what else is going into it? And is there any research out there on whether the additives added to, for example, vegan versus vegetarian versus meats, processed foods are any different, or if they have any different health impacts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this question was about the additives in ultra processed foods, if there's any research showing that these additives have a negative health consequence on it, particularly if it's different between vegan, vegetarian, animal products. So it really depends on the additive that we're talking about. And additives have only been really used in the last decade or a bit more than that. So with a lot of foods that we eat, the research goes for literally decades to see what impact it has on our health. So we don't have an answer just yet. Ideally, I do recommend avoiding what we classically would think of as ultra processed foods. So things that have lots of preservatives or additives added to it. It's got a shelf life of like 6 months. There's something in there that's helping to keep it alive that long. We don't really know the negative consequences of it just yet. But having small amounts of that in moderation, again, that annoying term coming up a lot, there's nothing wrong with that. So what we know right now is that there is no negative consequence of having little bits of it. Our body generally processes, gets rid of it. But yes, in terms of having large amounts of it constantly every day, more of the research is about the other nutrients that are in it. So if you're eating crisps all day long, then it's the other stuff, the salt, the fat, and all that in it, that we can see the negative health consequences. The particular additives, we don't know just yet, but it's a really good point. And in terms of if it differs between vegan, vegetarian, or animal-based products, not a lot. There is definitely some variation, but no, it's generally the same additives.
And also, there's an app called Yuka that you can scan products while grocery shopping, and it will tell you if it has additives. But I like to use that to compare a brand and choose the best one, because I'm also worried sometimes about like the additives.
That's awesome. Yeah, just going to say that for people on Zoom. So it's the app called Yuka, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it UCA or
YUKA.
YUKA? That you can scan products in a supermarket and see how many additives are added to it. That's very cool. Yeah.
Isn't there, with the bioavailability thing, isn't there a bit of a glitch in matrix with the labeling system? To say you've got like 20 grams of like fiber and there's 0% bioavailable, then people buy that food they're getting as a fiber. So why don't they just like fix the label?
Very good point. So yeah, that question was in terms of bioavailability. If it says, you know, 20 milligrams of iron on the label, but we can't actually absorb any of that, shouldn't we fix that? That is a really good point, and it should be fixed, yes, because knowing about the bioavailability of these different vitamins and minerals, that's not common knowledge. So yeah, it's a common misconception that we might think, right, spinach, we classically think of as being really high in iron, but it's got a bit in there, but also we can't absorb much from it. So yes, I feel like I completely agree. I feel like the labeling around how much we'll actually get from the product should be improved. Yes. I don't have an answer for that, but yes, I completely agree with you. Awesome. Yeah. Oh.
I've heard that since many people get their ironate from dairy products, or shit, you get the worry.
So, yeah, this question is about iodine. So yeah, that's a vitamin that I didn't cover. So iodine is, yes, a lot from animal products. It is also fortified into so many of the foods that we eat. So it's not actually a deficiency that we see very often in people on a plant-based diet. It's in breads and cereals. It's added to like so many things. So generally that is one that we manage to avoid.
Can I just add something you haven't mentioned actually is seaweed. And because seaweed can actually fulfill a lot of the nutritional gaps that a plant-based diet might otherwise be lacking. It's very high in protein. It is a natural source of omega-3. It contains B12. And because I might be wrong. Please correct me because I am believing this at the moment. And because it is an algae in general is where the fish, how they produce a lot of their omegas and things, which is why we then recommend to eat them. So my understanding is that little and often and it includes iodine as well, can actually up a lot of the nutritional gaps. That it also reduces the flatulence associated with beans.
So okay, so what we were just talking about there is about seaweed. Does that provide a lot of the nutrients that we need? Does that cover all of the gaps that we've talked about? And also does it reduce flatulence associated with beans? So in terms of seaweed, yes, there are definitely lots of nutrients in it. Raw seaweed has a lot of B12. When it's dried, a lot of it is removed, unfortunately. So if we're eating,
hydrate again afterwards,
it's already come out. Yeah, so it's not so much about, it's the processing of when that water is taken out. A lot of the water soluble vitamins, such as vitamin B12, leach out. So it doesn't necessarily have a lot of those nutrients. It's definitely got some still, but it's not necessarily going to make up a huge amount of it. In terms of protein, it's not quite a big source of protein. It is quite low. It is very fibrous though. It's a great source of fiber. Again, that's going to help increase our gut diversity. In terms of the flatulence associated with beans, so basically it very much so depends on the person. What causes gas when we eat beans is the fiber in it called fructans. This is a long chain of fructose, the sugar that we see in fruit, long molecule we can't break down, and it causes flatulence. In terms of seaweed counteracting it, I'm not actually sure on if that's true or not, but everyone also reacts to beans and legumes differently. So some people might not feel the symptoms of it very much. Other people, particularly if you have irritable bowel syndrome, will react quite a bit to beans. So yes, that's another reason why that might be a more difficult food to constantly incorporate, and soya products or cultivated meats might be a great option for the future.
So we had a question on the chat.
Brilliant.
How can we correctly treat diet not falling into orthorexia nervosa? I'm not sure I've heard of that.
Oh, yeah. So that was the question from Zoom. Thank you for posted that about orthorexia nervosa. So that was on one of the slides earlier, and that is when people choose to be on a plant-based diet for the purposes of losing weight. I am not the best person to answer this question. I'm not a dietitian with a background in eating disorders or disordered eating patterns. If we are concerned that that might be something that is going on, you can try to talk to the person. It is a very complex mental health condition, so I want to be careful with the way that I describe this, because it's not so much a lack of nutrition knowledge for people who have disordered eating patterns. They actually probably know quite a bit more than a lot of other people. It is a mental health condition and requires that attention. So if you do want to talk to the person, I'm not sure if that's about a friend they might have or about the person themselves, but to talk to them, I would recommend talking to a psychologist, talking to your GP about it, and yeah, just touching base with the person, not trying to force them to make a change. Because again, if we back them into a corner, that doesn't help to create change, particularly something that is so complex. So yeah, talk to them, show that you're there to support them, and see if they'll be willing to talk to a GP or a psychotherapist. Yeah.
I have two questions. I don't know, kind of related maybe, more about behavior change, and I suppose part of it is like making people move towards a plant-based diet. But one thing I wanted to ask about was the Nova tool, and I think it's being kind of implemented in some places. I was wondering like what you thought about that, being on like the front of package labeling. And then my second one, I think you briefly mentioned it about fear appeals, or you didn't say that, but you said like telling someone not to do something and they're going to do it anyway. So there's two kind of.
Yeah, so with the, the question, first one was about the Nova system, what we think about it, and if it gets, if it would be to be implemented onto packaging to say what category of processing this food has. So if you didn't pick it up from when I was talking as well, I'm not a massive fan of the Nova system. I think it's important to think of the processing that goes into the food, particularly when there are lots of additives added to it. However, I do think it is unfairly categorizing most food, because from the system, literally anything you make from scratch from home is already a processed food. So that does feel quite unfair to label foods that way. I think if it was to be refined to particularly point out that this food has a lot of additives in it, also doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it, that would be great, rather than just grouping it into these four broad categories. I think would be a better system. So we're looking at as a whole.
Like added to the traffic light system you already have as like a little badge on the side.
Exactly, like exactly. Traffic light system to be like lots and lots of additives, or it's just an ultra processed food because it was peanut butter and it was made in the factory.
That'd be a better way around it. Yeah.
And in terms of the next question was about behavior change, how to encourage someone to cut down on animal products or go to a plant-based diet. So it is quite a difficult thing to do. Generally trying to bark arguments at people does not work. Everyone, it seems a lot of people will know the benefits of being on a plant-based diet, whether it's the health benefits, the animal rights benefits, it's the environmental benefits of it. It shows that ramming those facts down people's throats does not work to change behavior. Hopefully it does for a group, but not for everyone. It's really up to the individual how you can kind of approach them, but whether it is gradually introducing the change is the best way to go about it, finding out that person's reasons for not wanting to change and trying to work around that. So is it that, oh, the foods don't taste good enough, or vegan foods don't taste good? Be like, well, here, try this. And that might change their mind. They might try and go 1 day a week where they go meat-free and slowly make those changes. Show that there are awesome plant-based alternatives out there is going to be one of the best strategies. The cooking process that you put it through to show that you can add extra flavor to, tofu. One of the common things you hear when people are like, oh, tofu tastes terrible. Yeah, you've got to add flavor to it and then it's absolutely delicious. So showing that it can be done and it is delicious and you can do it nutritiously is one of the steps. It is a slow thing, particularly for some people that are very adamant meat eaters, and hopefully that's where the space of cultivated meats will really be able to help, because it will be able to provide that food that they want that has that lower impact on our environment.
Yeah, I suppose like behavior change in general, like you always need that, I don't know, FSC message or whatever they call it, that someone they can do it rather than just saying like, don't do that. Or...
Exactly. Yeah, behavior change is a very complex thing.
Hi. So I was wondering about kind of the bioavailability within like a population. Is it like quite variable, like between individuals and different cultures, about how much protein and stuff they can absorb from a single food?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question being, does bioavailability absorbing those nutrients vary between different populations? Not very much, surprisingly. So there's not a lot of research out there to show all different ethnicities or any different background, different people absorb differently. But no, it doesn't look like it varies very much.
About the IBS, so a lot of plant-based foods have like the FODMAPs in it.
Yeah.
So how do you go about reducing your FODMAPs to try and like remove the symptoms, but also eating plant?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. So again, anyone's still on Zoom, but if you have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, a lot of these plant-based foods are very high in FODMAPs, which cause symptoms. For anyone, a brief summary, FODMAPs is a long acronym that basically stands for different groups of fibers that our body can't break down. If you have IBS, it might be one group of foods that your body can't break down that causes symptoms. It might be 2, 3, 4, it might be all of them. So it's things like lactose, the sugar in dairy, it's fructose, sugar in fruit, the mannitol, xylitol, fructans, there's a whole bunch of them. And they are naturally occurring in fruits, vegetables, and legumes. So that is very heavily in plant-based diets. As someone who has to do this, it can be quite difficult. Soy ends up being something that I do rely on quite a lot. Because it doesn't have as much of those FODMAPs in it. It's actually very, very low in it. As well, it depends on the individual. So some people can tolerate a small amount of legumes. Other people, it's absolutely zero. So the way as dietitians, if someone has IBS and we test what foods you can get away with still eating, is that we literally say, cut it out, and then let's, after a few weeks where your gut's gotten all better, you're not having any symptoms, reintroduce a small amount. And we go, right, can you tolerate half a slice of toast? That went okay, let's go to a full slice of toast and go from there. So it's about seeing what your body can tolerate and spacing it out. So for me, I will have lentils once every few weeks and I'll rely on other plant-based products from that point onwards. So it's just about having that little bit, not having it back to back to back to back to back to try and avoid what we call the load, the amount that you put into your system, your body then hits the threshold and freaks out at, is the medical term.